This video is about balancing life as a stay-at-home mom while still finding time to create your art. I felt it was very important to make a video like this because I didn't have someone telling me I could do it when I was feeling lost and a little hopeless after my kid was born. So this video will mostly be me giving encouragement and tips to my past self who might be you right now. So you just had a baby, or maybe you had a baby and now they're a toddler. A chaotic one at that. Constantly exploring and getting into things they shouldn't, doing amazing and endearing things one moment, throwing a tantrum the next. You're trying your best to keep afloat, all the while trying to keep your house clean, your pets taken care of, and so many other things. So where's the time for you? How are you going to be able to make some time for yourself when it feels like everything is pulling you in so many directions? I'm getting anxious just talking about it. My context. I wanted to share my context and how I ended up getting to the point of becoming balanced, but feel free to skip ahead to the tips portion of the video if you need to for sake of time. In the beginning, I had no time for myself, literally. When my son was born, I had trouble getting him to latch, so instead of breastfeeding, I was pumping every couple of hours to make sure he had food. This was usually done while he was napping, since newborns sleep so much. But it also meant that other chores, or maybe even a quick power nap for myself, would take the back burner. I felt swamped in chores, despite having some help from my mom and my sister-in-law in those first couple of days home from the hospital. My husband was able to help during his paternity leave, but soon he was back to work and I was left with a cute and cranky baby to take care of. While I did embrace this big change in my life, there was still a note of bittersweetness to it. I felt like my old life had ended and I was too busy to properly mourn it. I really missed the days of being child-free, where I could go into my office and relax by drawing uninterrupted for hours at a time. I would live stream my commissions or personal art at the time, chat with my community, get to stay up late hanging out with my husband or friends, play MMOs, and do a lot of other things that people without young children get to do. I stubbornly wanted to still do that, while also now being a newly minted mom. But the frustrating part was that there was simply no time for me to do so. When the baby was sleeping, chores still had to be done, laundry folded, floors vacuumed, dishes cleaned, a lot of other things. And if and when those happened to all be done, I was too exhausted to sit down and draw. Or I'd check the clock and see that the baby would be waking up from his nap at any moment. Certainly not enough time to actually sneak in a drawing session. I could maybe get lucky, turn on my computer, launch Photoshop at the time, and maybe get a few minutes of floundering, trying to remember where I left off on a particular drawing. A couple of brush strokes in before the telltale crying of a hungry baby was waking up from his nap. So those first few months I gave up completely on trying to do commissions and live streams. I put everything on a temporary hiatus. My live streams, art commissions, my Patreon, all of which were just starting to take off and make decent money, got put on hold until further notice. My career felt like it ended before it had really even had a chance. And while I was finding a sense of fulfillment as a mom, my identity as an artist, which I cherished deeply, slipped right through my fingers. I was rebuilding my new identity. I just didn't know it at the time. A few months went by. I weaned my 4-month-old off of breast milk and switched to formula. The change gave me back some more time and a lot more sleep. Baby started sleeping longer stretches of time at night, so I was starting to become less sleep deprived, which resulted in more energy to do chores. On the nights, especially when he was still a newborn and I was stuck pumping, I watched a lot of content on how to have an organized home, how to be more time efficient, and of course a lot of art videos. I knew I didn't have the time for making art, so I wanted to solve the problem by learning as much as I could during this season of my life. My way of tackling it was to educate myself as much as possible. There was a lot of anime in there too, but that was for the de-stressing part. The stuff I learned will be shared later in the tips portion of this video. So back to the context. It was close to the 6-month mark that I started feeling like I had some time for myself again. It was in the form of the baby's naps. Thankfully, he slept in pretty predictable patterns for weeks at a time, so I could count on getting some drawing time in during those naps, but only if I prioritized getting my chores done earlier in the day. I took my commissions off of hiatus and began working on them at a much slower pace. This made me super happy and scared at the same time. I had to make sure I communicated with my clients very clearly, set expectations that my old way of doing things was going to be much, much slower, and that there might be a week or two here and there that absolutely no progress would get done, because that would be the week where baby's nap pattern would inevitably switch up on me and I'd take a while to adapt. Live streams started popping in here and there, but it didn't feel the same. My community was mostly in Europe, so I used to stream in the morning to be able to hang out with them, but my new life only gave me time to stream in the late afternoon, which was basically bedtime for my friends overseas. Still, I tried for a while, here and there. I finished a few commissions over the course of the next few months, all the while raising my kid and maintaining my household. I needed to change my way of thinking about my art. My current things required a lot of time I didn't have. During certain parts of the day, I wasn't available, and if I kept clinging to this old way, I would inevitably burn out and become miserable again. So I reevaluated what I wanted. I knew I wanted to draw. That was the easy part. I knew that outside of commissions, I had no vector. If I wanted to draw something, it became an amalgamous cloud of, what the heck should I draw? And then I would spend that whole time being indecisive and not do anything. I clung to commissions for a long time because it was fun, and I could draw a bunch of amazing characters for my clients. It made a decent chunk of money, and it was easy to focus on. So it was really hard to let it go. In my time reevaluating, I reasoned with myself that I could build something else that was more passive. It would make less money than my old way of doing commissions, but considering at the time it was taking me months to do a single $300 commission, things would even out pretty quickly. So I let it go, finally, and I let live streaming go, finally. I floundered a bit in the next few months, thinking, well, maybe I can open an online store and do stickers and prints and make money that way. But it was too much time. It might as well be commissions with less pay. I explored a bunch of other things and devoted a lot of time to research and analysis paralysis. All the while, a small little voice in the back of my head kept saying, "Hey, what about that story you wanted to make a few years ago? The one you were too scared to take that first step for? You'll be turning 30 this year, so why not do something you've always wanted to do instead of pushing it off again?" That little voice was the right thing I needed, and I finally caved to it. So I started researching the ways I could tell that story before finally rediscovering Webtoon. Taking a step back and really examining what I wanted to do helped me find a sturdy anchor to ground myself with. I went from floundering about what I was going to do with my free time once I actually had some, to actually having a good idea of what I was going to do every time I got to finally step into my office. So I guess the first thing I want you to ask yourself is this: what do you want for yourself when it comes to your art? And then be brutally honest. Are the goals you want for yourself now the ones that you had before raising kids came into the picture? Are these goals still doable? Or do you need to adapt and change it up a bit to fit into your new lifestyle? You can pause the video here to think about it for a bit if you want. So now I had a clear goal of what I wanted from my art. I wanted to tell the story of Fairy Lantern as a webcomic. I could still have some flex room for other fun art-related things, but now my clear focus when I had free time for art was on the comic. This came in the form of learning as much as I could about the medium since I had no prior knowledge to making webcomics. Writing the story, designing the characters, designing the setting, and the research involved. There were so many moving parts which felt pretty daunting at first, but I quickly realized that there was no deadline other than the one that I set for myself. So the stress for that subsided, and in the months before I officially launched my comic on Webtoon Canvas, I chugged along with working on things 30 minutes to an hour at a time, usually at night after the baby was asleep and occasionally during his naps. It felt so liberating. I finally had my art time back. Granted, it took a different form, but I finally felt excited again. When the comic launch day arrived, I had my prologue episode in 3 parts and a single episode buffer that was chopped up into 4 parts to release over the course of 4 Mondays. So essentially a 4-week buffer. This allowed me to stay approximately a month ahead on my comic for a year and a half. So now that you know my context, let's talk about the tips that helped me get to where I felt balanced in being a stay-at-home mom and an artist. Time management tips. While I'm not perfect at it, I do believe that being mindful of how your time is spent each day can help you identify where there's gaps to fit in an extra chore or an activity in with your little one, and maybe see where it is appropriate to get in some art time for yourself. Front stacking chores. What I mean by this is to get weekly chores done near the beginning of the week and get daily chores done earlier in the morning. For example, laundry is usually done on a Monday, and I try to get it folded and put away the same day. Keyword is try, but at least the laundry is clean. Dishes are a daily chore, so I try to get it done in the morning if there's anything chilling in the sink from the night before. Front stacking the chores freed up more time for me to actually play with my toddler and focus on teaching him stuff. And it also ensured that I had the option to draw during his afternoon naps, since all the other things were taken care of. Making less work for myself. I try to be proactive and make less work for myself during the day, so I'm not so tired at night that I can't do anything. These can be small things that add up time-wise. For example, cleaning up the first round of toys before getting more toys out, vacuuming only a couple of rooms in the house instead of the whole house each week, rinsing the dishes before they get crusty and loading them directly into the dishwasher after every meal, so that there's not a mountain of dishes to do at the end of the day. Stuff like that. Some other examples would be rotating toys and leaving some in storage so that there's not a toy explosion every day. Or if there is, that it only takes about 5 to 10 minutes max to clean everything up. Also, making sure the house is relatively decluttered and organized. If you have a home for all your things, it becomes less time spent putting things away. Teaching your kids to put things away in spots they belong so that they can help you out is also a game changer. Thanks, Marie Kondo and the Home Edit. I love you. Asking for help / sharing the workload. I'm thankfully in a position where my husband works from home and he's able to help out with some of the chores after work. So he gets dinner taken care of about 3 times a week. And he's in charge of taking out the trash, recycling, and recently, since I'm pregnant, handling the cat litter. 4 cats was a great idea before having children. It is still nice, just a challenge at the moment. I also invite my toddler to help me wherever he can. When it's vacuuming, I have him help by moving light objects or picking things up off the ground. If it's dishes, I can have him stand on his little step stool and I'll hand him all the safe silverware or give him some Tupperware to put away. Sometimes this takes longer, but I think in the long run, it will help us get into the habit of doing chores together and build a solid foundation for him to do his own chores in the future. For laundry, I usually have him hand me clothes to fold from the basket, or he'll drag his hamper from his bedroom to the washer for me to load it. We just got out of the phase where he unfolds all the clothes that I folded, so I consider that a win, too. And now that he's almost 3 and pretty tall, he'll be able to help put his clothes in the drawer soon. For grocery shopping, I try to involve him by asking him to help me find certain things on the grocery list. This definitely works well in the produce section where all the fruits and veggies are on display. While these examples aren't exactly sharing the workload, I do think it's important to work with your kid rather than just try to push through all the chores by yourself, like that they're just chores. It took significantly more energy to do these chores when I wasn't involving my toddler, because he's still there. He still has to tag along with me while I do all these things. And if I ignored him to just get it done, what I usually found was an energy draining tantrum happening while trying to do those chores. and it usually ended when I caved and left the chore in progress. Thankfully, I haven't had to do the dreaded abandoning a cart full of groceries before, but I think that was mostly because for a long time I had a lot of anxiety about it, and I just wouldn't go to the grocery store. Like literally, I would I would literally just only go during his nap times, where my husband could keep an ear out for him while he worked from home. I have the Montessori method of teaching to thank a lot for this tip, but I'll get to talking about the Montessori method later. Babysitting, kind of. Have your spouse watch the baby in the hours after work to bedtime for just a couple of nights a week. For example, I take care of my son during the work week since my husband works full time. When he's off of work, we have dinner together, and then one of us is the main baby caretaker for the rest of the night until the child goes to bed. So usually my husband watches our son Tuesday and Thursday after work, while I do Monday and Wednesday. Friday is our flex day where we can watch our son together or call in a babysitter, usually a family member, so we can hang out with friends. But this little bit of extra time adds up. It's usually only an hour or two, but on a good week, I get 4 hours of drawing time in for those 2 days without having to stay up super late at night. Which leads to my next time management tip. Draw while the kids are asleep. My son goes to bed between 9:30 and 10 p.m., mostly because I'm not a morning person, and I don't want my son waking up at the butt crack of dawn every day. So when he's down for the night, if I have any extra energy that night, I'll usually try to get more comic work done from about 10 p.m. to midnight. Midnight is usually my wind down time because if I stay up later than that, I end up too tired in the morning and get off on the wrong foot for the whole next day. So if I have a good week where I manage to get time in every night, that's about 10 more hours a week of comic making time. Morning routine. I did do a little experiment for a whole month where I flipped my hours around. Went to bed early and tried to wake up about 2 hours before my son and husband woke up. It honestly was amazing for the month that I did it, because it freed up the time in the evening for me to actually hang out with my friends, so I got a little bit more social life in there. So if you're more of a morning person, that might be a better option. Sadly, since I became pregnant with my second kid, I haven't been able to wake up that early due to the fatigue. But I do plan on trying this out again, maybe after the newborn phase is over, but we'll see. Taking care of a newborn with a 3-year-old running around will definitely be a challenge. Setting boundaries for social media and checking emails. When I was doing art full-time before kids, I had this habit of checking my email at least once a day, which made sense at the time since I was coordinating with clients on their commissions and checking notifications on various social media stuff since I was trying to build a following for my art. That habit stuck with me for a long time, even after the baby was born, and I started to realize that it was becoming a huge time dump, and a depressing one at that. Seeing a lot of my artist mutuals progressing with their art careers made me happy for them, but down about my own situation. And I would end up in a bad mood for the rest of the day. So while I didn't spend too much time physically on social media, it wore down my mental health for hours after, and I would be sluggish in getting all my other responsibilities done, because all I could focus on was how much I missed being in my office drawing and improving my skills. Eventually, I had an epiphany that I should set a boundary to check social media only after I was done with my responsibilities for the day. And I could definitely make do with checking my email just once a week since I wasn't doing commissions anymore. That freed up more time and headspace for me to get the things I actually needed to get done and worry less about the things that were outside of my bubble. Organizing priorities and setting realistic expectations. If your priorities aren't lined up correctly, it makes everything an uphill battle. So what's your main job? As far as priorities go, my main job is stay-at-home mom, while making my comic comes secondary. It took me an embarrassingly long time to figure that one out, because I desperately wanted to keep my old life alive by being a full-time artist and a full-time mom. When I finally let that go and explored what it meant to be a full-time mom and a part-time artist, That sense of balance finally set in, and I felt much better about my own identity and goals. It also helped me structure my day-to-day better. 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. is the stay-at-home mom shift. I've learned that the times that I'm most freed up to do comic work is either early in the morning before everyone is awake, or later in the evening when the toddler is asleep and hubby's got his own fun stuff to do. When I've tried to do art stuff in the middle of the day, like sneak in some panel paintings when my toddler is really involved in a quiet activity, he inevitably realizes that I'm not paying attention to him and gets upset or even makes a big mess because he thinks I'm not watching anymore. Basically, I've realized that I'm not the type of person who can split my attention like that when it comes to making art and toddler wrangling. So I now have a strict no art making policy during stay-at-home mom business hours, at least for now. The cool part about a lot of this is that as your kid gets older, they'll have their own things that they get interested in and want to do. So that means they can do their own thing while you do yours if you line it up right. But for now, it's just working around those hours. Large blocks of time to do art will basically be non-existent. I had to set the expectation that I won't always get solid time slots to work on my comic, and that instead I should try to aim for 5 to 10 hours a week of art time. Some weeks that's all in one day and I don't touch my comic for the other 6 days. Other weeks that's 45 minutes here and there. Your other hobbies will most likely have to involve your kids. I had to set the expectation that other hobbies come secondary to my comic and that I have to let those things happen in the middle of the day, and it's most likely going to have to involve my kids in some way to actually do it. For example, I still like to try sketching in a physical sketchbook every once in a while, and not usually anything fairy lantern related. It's nice because it's portable, unlike my computer setup, and it still helps me satisfy that need to make something. But since it is done during the stay-at-home mom hours, I usually involve my toddler in it. When he was much smaller, I bought some toddler-safe fat crayons, like the big non-toxic chunky ones that are super easy for babies to grip. And I would let my son basically graffiti my sketchbook. It was actually really fun because he was seeing and learning how to hold a drawing utensil correctly without me really needing to move his hands around, and it was also fostering a love for doodling at an early age. Now that he's a little older, he gets his own little sketchbook with those same crayons, and I get to draw mine, minus the graffiti. Another example is to try and get some workout time. I used to try and do it early in the morning before everyone was awake, but since I've prioritized my comic for that time slot, I now try to do the workouts during the day with, you guessed it, the toddler. It's hit or miss, but some days he'll watch me do the workout. Other times he'll try to join me, and it's really funny. And then on occasion I get the full, "No, mommy, don't work out," tantrum because he really just wants to have me do something else. Just be persistent and understand that there will be days where the mini boss just doesn't approve. I consider it a win if I can get 3 workouts in a week. Although currently I'm not doing full workouts because I'm pregnant. So I'm back to mom calisthenics, such as the classic squatting to pick up toys, lifting my toddler as if he were a dumbbell, and power walk chasing him around the house for tag. Being aware of your time. I try to make it a point to pay close attention to how I spend my time and where, and also have the discipline to say no to things that won't benefit my work as a stay-at-home mom or my time to work on my comic. For example, sometimes it's mighty tempting to just binge watch a K-drama on Netflix during my free time for a whole week, or unwind with the video game a few nights in a row, or stay up super late hanging out with friends, or abandoning my chores for a day because I'm way too tired and I can do it later. Having the discipline to say no, or even giving myself a hard cutoff for stuff is challenging, but then I can still get some of that time in smaller doses, and I still get art stuff done too. For example, maybe I tell myself to stick to my usual routine for the weekdays and then save the binge watching for the weekend. Or I set a hard cutoff for hanging out with my friends, like, okay guys, we hang out on Fridays after dinner until 10 p.m. and that's it. Or I prioritize getting my 10 hours of comic work done earlier in the week, and now I can reward myself by giving myself permission to do the K-drama binge session or stay up late with friends and play video games. Taking breaks. It's also important to recognize when you do in fact need a bigger break, and it's okay to binge watch that show. To know that it was needed to recover and recenter, and to not feel guilty about it later when you're working on your art and feeling like you're behind on your deadlines. The weekends are also my built-in breaks where I give myself the option to do something other than my comic. Usually they are for my family first, and then when we all want to do our own separate things, I can sneak into my office and get more comic work done. But again, that's only if we decide as a family that we're going to do our own things for that day. A typical day. So what does my typical day look like? Well, it does change around a bit, but it goes like this. Wake up, make breakfast for myself. Hubby usually gets breakfast for the toddler now that he's a toddler, and mostly because I'm not a morning person and need a bit of time to wake up. After breakfast, I do chores until about noon. Depending on the day, that usually involves vacuuming, laundry, dishes, cleaning up toddler messes, and usually I'm involving my kid with the chores, and he's roping me into playing with him between the said chores. Then it's lunchtime. I make lunch for myself and my toddler. Usually we're reheating leftover dinner from the night before, or putting together a quick sandwich. Sometimes hubby gets to join us, since he works from home, and sometimes I get lucky and he'll even change a diaper for me on his break, or maybe make lunch for the toddler. If we're going out for other chores, I usually try to do it after lunch, such as grocery shopping. I try to shop for the whole week, so I only have to do this once a week. Other times I'll use that time slot to take my kid to one of the parks around here so he can run around and burn a lot of that toddler energy. And lately that's also been time to go visit my parents who have recently moved to town. Yay! Finally! That tends to burn a few hours, and before I know it, it's close to 4 p.m. We're back at the house and it's the toddler's nap time. It's kind of hit or miss lately, but on the days he does nap, I'll usually get about an hour and a half, maybe sometimes 2 hours if he's really tired himself out. Other time he just opts for a quiet time, which is still in his room, but he gets to play in there for an hour and then he's done. So that child free time is usually spent getting in some comic work or even a nap for myself if he's really tired me out. And lately, since I'm pregnant, that's been the case. And yeah, after a nap, it's usually around dinner time. Myself or my husband will make dinner, or we'll just grab something quick to eat. We all eat together as a family, and then whoever is not on duty gets to go to their respective office and get to do their own thing. And the other parent will hang out with the toddler from dinner time all the way to bedtime. And then once the toddler is put down for bedtime for the night, then I'll come back into my office and try and draw for about 2 hours. But of course, that's only if I am able to. There's definitely a lot of nights, especially since I'm pregnant right now, that I literally just go to sleep right after he does. So yeah, there's that typical usual day in my life, really quick edition. Efficiency with my comic making process. Streamlining my art process. It's important to make my process as efficient as possible. Sometimes that means learning some new methods and tools to make it faster. Other times it's just learning new keyboard shortcuts on the computer. And every once in a while it's switching art software completely. Things I did to make myself more efficient. I cleaned up my file structure for my comic. Keeping it organized shaves a bunch of time spent having to look for stuff when I know exactly where my file directory I need to go. And if you're a traditional artist, this may take the form of having your art supplies organized and prepped for a session ahead of time, or just simply having a clean studio space to work in. I became more deliberate and decisive with my art. If something wasn't looking right, I didn't have the luxury to agonize over it for hours, so I had to move on and come back to it later. It made the process of making progress on my comic a lot quicker. I learned how to draw faster by going back to the basics and studying anatomy and figure drawing. It's easy to settle into a set way to do things, but if you're actively looking for ways to improve and learning said ways, you will see a significant increase in speed. Things that took hours to draw may only take half the time soon. When I cut social media time, I replaced it with more learning sessions from YouTube and Skillshare, usually geared towards making comics better, improving my drawing skills, and lately more video editing and YouTube skills to be able to share my comic making adventure with you guys. I also accepted that some panels in my comic are just going to be deemed budget panels, and I don't need to draw a perfect hand or face in every single panel. Basically, I'm saying you can become more efficient as an artist if you let go of the perfectionism and embrace the little mistakes here and there. Speaking of, here's my personal hurdles that I had to overcome. Saying goodbye to perfectionism and unrealistic standards. I had this unrealistic standard of what I thought I needed to follow in order to be the best parent I could be. The perfect mom was the one who had an immaculate house, was always dressed nice and ready to go with a well-behaved child in tow. She would have time for all the things she wanted to do while still rocking that stay-at-home mom life. The perfect artist was the one who somehow managed to churn out amazing art to social media on a seemingly daily basis. Still have time to make that comic and do commissions on the side. Still manage to live stream a few days a week and post videos to their YouTube channel consistently. All the while, she's still meeting her personal deadlines for posting her Patreon rewards and participating in different collabs each month and replying to all those comments on her webtoon episodes. So yeah, those people might exist somewhere out there, and I do want to strive to do all those things, but let's tone it back into something a little more realistic, especially when I'm combining these things. And that's only 2 parts of my life. Throwing in the ideal wife, the ideal friend, the ideal daughter and sister for my family, I had to accept that I can't be perfect. Other personal hurdles were reevaluating what I could actually do art-wise, from going from live streams to YouTube videos, and then going from commissions to making my webcomic. And I also just had to come to terms with my idea of being a parent, to how I needed to actually do things in order to do both. Be an artist and a parent, and still have my sanity at the end. So yeah, I think a lot of my personal hurdles were just that I really needed to tone it back and actually like set my expectations in the real world and realize that I was a human being that had like a finite amount of time in a given day and a finite amount of energy to be able to actually do the things that I really wanted to do. So, and I had to make sure that I was still taking care of myself and not just trying to chase this ideal version of myself that I thought that I needed to be. Raising a helpful and independent toddler. I touched on this subject a little bit earlier in the video when I talked about sharing chores with your kid, but now let me go into a little more detail about it. Montessori-style teaching really helped me lay the groundwork for raising my son to be independent pretty quickly. And I liked that I could do it at home without needing to enroll him in a fancy school or daycare. So what is the Montessori method? Montessori is an education philosophy and practice that fosters rigorous, self-motivated growth for children and adolescents in all areas of their development, with the goal of nurturing each child's natural desire for knowledge, understanding, and respect. And the Hapa Family Channel is a great one to get plenty of sound Montessori advice. Ashley is my hero, okay? I feel like I owe a lot of my sanity to her helpful advice. The Montessori method of teaching helped me make my whole house more geared to help my toddler be independent. One of the main takeaways I got from learning about Montessori was that by making my whole house baby and toddler friendly, I was setting my son up for successfully becoming independent in a controlled environment. And I'll be able to apply this to my daughter's learning after she's born as well. I could probably go on and on about this, but this video is probably already long enough, so I'll just link her channel in the description and you guys can go check it out if the Montessori stuff is interesting to you. Last set of tips. Managing expectations for both being a stay-at-home mom and a part-time artist. I needed to accept that I couldn't hold myself to the same standards as other comic artists on the platform who were able to commit to full-time job hours on their comic. I also needed to accept that some days I would get nothing done on my comic, and that was okay. That had to be okay. As long as the baby was taken care of and happy, I could feel fulfilled despite the lack of art that day, and know that not every day would be like this, and I would find my rhythm again soon. I needed to accept that in order to give myself drawing time, I would have to sacrifice other things, like watching shows and playing video games, or going out with friends frequently, or that I would have to set strong boundaries and have the discipline to actually stick to them, and also making sure that I set boundaries for myself and my family so that I could still have some me time. So those were some of the expectations that I had to manage. Being a stay-at-home mom is challenging all by itself, and throwing a part-time job of being an artist into the mix, whether it's a hobby or not, makes it seem impossible to manage both. But I can do it. You can do it too. And remember, it's only temporary. The kids will grow up and get more independent each day, and you'll soon find yourself with much more free time to do the things that you want to do again. So hang in there. You'll be okay. Thanks for watching.